This website is intended to support a science research project on invasive species, more specifically Mnemiopsis leidyi. Currently, this website is not published yet. However, when you are seeing this video, it will be published, and the video you are seeing right now will have been in this empty box. We are currently looking at the home page, which will be the introductory page for people looking at this website. It provides a small introduction to the species. Mnemiopsis leidyi, commonly referred to as sea walnuts, is an invasive species native to the Atlantic coast, and its introduction to several European seas have caused much negative impact towards local species and economies. Now, if we scroll up and look, we see several tabs or pages which show all the pages and subpages of this website, the first of which is the Mnemiopsis tab. This page is another introductory page which will go over some basic data and information about Mnemiopsis, which will be expanded upon in other pages. So the first page we have is the identity, which shows its names and its taxonomy. So yeah, its scientific name of Mnemiopsis and its common name of sea walnuts, and I will be exclusively referring to it as Mnemiopsis in this project. And then we have the taxonomic tree. We see it is part of the eukaryotic family domain, obviously, and the Metazoa kingdom, and it is a ctenophore. The next tab is the Origins tab, which discusses the original range of Mnemiopsis in the Atlantic coast of the Americas, living in nearshore communities in broad ranges of conditions. The Diet tab discusses, its diet and what Mnemiopsis consumes, which include fish eggs, small planktons, small crustaceans, and small fish. So basically, any animal smaller than it. These two tabs, the Origins and the Diet tabs, will be expanded upon in the distribution and the impact pages. And the last tab shows the fun facts, which is just miscellaneous facts, including Mnemiopsis' reason it's called the sea walnut, because it's slow, blind, brainless, and looks like a walnut. Mnemiopsis is not a jellyfish, but a comb jelly, and how they produce their rainbow-colored light with their cilia. These tabs presenting the data are collapsible, so you will be able to see them once you click on the tabs. The next page is the distribution page, which showcases the range of Mnemiopsis as an invasive species. So here we have on this map, again, Mnemiopsis' original range in the Atlantic coast, as well as its new ranges in Eurasian seas. If we scroll down here, we will look at more specific seas, such as the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, and North and Baltic Seas. So the first one here is the Black Sea, which is the most infamous example of Mnemiopsis invasion, because they were the first to have Mnemiopsis invade them, and the introduction of Mnemiopsis caused a crash in the anchovy fisheries in the 1980s. Mnemiopsis was likely carried to the Black Sea via ballast waters on ships, and this is also how they were transported into the Caspian, which they were reported in the late 90s. Their presence in the Caspian has brought fears that it could damage the caviar industry, which is incredibly important in the Caspian Sea area. Lastly, the North and Baltic Seas, which reported Mnemiopsis in the late 2000s. It's unknown how Mnemiopsis got here, but it's likely they were brought via ship ballast as well. The presence of Mnemiopsis affects fish stocks in the area, which are incredibly important to the island nations in the area. So here we have the ship ballast, which I have mentioned for the past few seas. What ship ballasts are what ships use to not tip or heel, which will cause them to capsize. Some ships use water ballast, which basically they allow water to get inside the hull to balance the ship. Now, naturally, this will let creatures get inside the hull and will eventually be dumped in foreign environments, which is what happened with Mnemiopsis. And lastly, on this page, another map of their distribution. However, this one includes the alleles or halotypes of Mnemiopsis. The next page is the impacts page, which is divided into two subpages, which you'll see once you hover over the bar. And if you click on the first one, which is local species, which will describe the local species affected by Mnemiopsis. The first species we have up here is anchovies, which I brought up when I was talking about the Black Sea. Again, they're the most infamous example because they were the first. When Mnemiopsis was introduced into the 80s, their stock of anchovies plummeted by almost 500,000 tons. And it's likely due to the consumption of their food by Mnemiopsis. Next species highlighted are copepods, which are small crustaceans that are incredibly important to the ocean food chain in the North Sea. They possess heightened senses which allow them to detect even the smallest movement in the water around them. However, Mnemiopsis still manages to prey on them. They do this by creating a current that pulls in the copepods, which make them practically invisible. It's so slow that they don't even know they are eaten until they are eaten. We will go further into depth in a research article on this website. And since copepods are incredibly important to the food chain, the depletion of their population would rob a food source from other animals that rely on it, such as cod. A species that plays a similar role to copepods are planktons, which are also very important to marine food chains, and they have been victims of predation by Mnemiopsis. The Mnemiopsis introduction has brought mass declining populations of plankton. In the Caspian, they reported up to a 50% reduction, and these creatures are very important for other marine organisms, just like the copepods. They are food for other organisms. So the depletion of their population will in turn affect others. Lastly, we have the beluga sturgeon, which is native to the Caspian Sea, where Mnemiopsis was introduced in the late 1990s. The beluga sturgeon is very lucrative for its fish eggs, which is caviar, the most expensive caviar, and the introduction of Mnemiopsis has brought predation against its eggs and its food sources, therefore bringing disastrous economic outcomes for the local economy. Now, if we go to the second subpage of the impacts tab page, we have a graph which shows the relationship between Mnemiopsis and the anchovy stocks of the 80s, the blue representing the anchovies and the red representing Mnemiopsis. As you can see, there is a large crash in the early 80s, but now it has recovered. Here we have the research page, which shows summaries and links for some scientific studies on Mnemiopsis, the first of which is the prediction of expansion of Mnemiopsis. The study is linked to the title, and this study covers mainly global warming and the effects it will have on Mnemiopsis. So here we have the study which was linked once you click on the title. So as global warming continues, well, if we keep prolonging it, it will warm waters such as the Arctic, and since Mnemiopsis is a native to warm waters, they would be enabled to just move to Arctic waters, furthering their expansion. The Caspian and Black Seas are pretty cold compared to the Atlantic Ocean that Mnemiopsis is native to, but due to global warming, they are now warmer, allowing it to survive a lot easier. So if this continues, they will continue to expand. Now let's move to the next study, which focuses on the potential threat that Mnemiopsis poses to the North Sea. Mnemiopsis is infamous for posing a threat to fish stocks, like I mentioned before, with anchovies and beluga sturgeons, so this study focuses on the predation of fish eggs. However, it has shown that they do not prefer fish eggs and actually prefer to prey on plankton and copepods and small creatures, which means that they do not pose a direct threat to fish stock. However, this does mean that they would be taking food away from fish, therefore stealing their food and possibly damaging their population. However, they would not feed on fish eggs in the North Sea. If we scroll down here, we see a figure which shows the relationship between Mnemiopsis and fish egg stock, and as you can see with the black dots which represent fish eggs, they vary very wildly, and there is no correlation between Mnemiopsis introduction and the abundance of fish eggs. So if we go to the last research study, which will focus on the predatory success of Mnemiopsis. So I was talking about this earlier with the copepods and the invisibility that Mnemiopsis practically possesses. So here we have the link. So to repeat again, copepods are very small and aware of their surroundings. However, Mnemiopsis creates a small current that allows them to be sucked up without them even knowing. Now this is not unique to Mnemiopsis, and other creatures have the ability, such as oysters. However, the oyster's ability is limited to feeding on phytoplankton, whereas Mnemiopsis is more mobile and able to forage like a predator. This goes to show the potential ability for Mnemiopsis to go unimpeded by taking copepods and zooplanktons that are incredibly important to the food chain. So if we scroll down here, we have a figure that displays the anatomy of Mnemiopsis. So image A, well, it's one image, but it's A and B. Image A is from the side, and image B is from the bottom, where it's facing the mouth or the oral lobe, and the labeled red letters represent the cilia that Mnemiopsis uses to move and to create the currents that capture their prey. And the second figure we have here monitors the velocity field surrounding Mnemiopsis. So the colors, like the green and the red, they represent the velocity surrounding Mnemiopsis. So A and B are obviously stationary, and as you can see with C, there is a lot of velocity surrounding it. So it is either moving or it is trying to feed by sucking in a prey via the current that we mentioned earlier. Now let's go to the next page, which focuses on the solutions, the possible solutions that could mitigate Mnemiopsis invasive effects. So here we have two subpages. First one are biocontrols, which is the first suggestion. And the main reason that Mnemiopsis has gone very successfully in these foreign environments is because they lack a natural predator. So naturally, the solution would just be to introduce a natural predator. This is what we call a biological pest control, or just a biocontrol. A candidate for this is Barocucumis, which is also a comb jelly, and they've also arrived in the Black Sea during the 1990s. They also seem to exclusively feed on Mnemiopsis, and their presence has managed to stabilize plankton populations in some areas with Mnemiopsis. And another candidate is the butterfish, whose diet includes Mnemiopsis. It's a good candidate because it has low commercial appeal, therefore it won't be fished. However, scientists worry that if they use a butterfish to try and control Mnemiopsis, it'll just escape the Black Sea, maybe cross into the Aegean and the Mediterranean, and become an invasive species itself. This is the main reason that biocontrols are a very controversial, I guess you could say, method of trying to control invasive species, because if you just introduce species after species, you might just make the situation worse. If we look at the other solution to Mnemiopsis expansion, we can see ballast regulation, which, as I mentioned earlier, ballast water dumping is what caused Mnemiopsis to be introduced in the first place, and stricter regulation on such would be a more proactive solution to preventing more and more expansion for Mnemiopsis. And the second to last page now is the analysis page, which I provide an overall analysis given that the data we got from the past few pages, and it's pretty bleak. So, since Mnemiopsis' introduction in the 80s, it's caused a significant amount of damage from the anchovies in the Black Sea to the beluga sturgeons in the Caspian. It's obvious that it has been very destructive. Now, since they don't have a predator, a natural predator in these areas, they've gone unimpeded, and the thought of introducing a natural predator is a very controversial, for lack of a better word, and for the fear of just creating more and more invasive species. And another problem to add on to it, a bit more existential, is global warming, which is slowly destroying our world, but also giving Mnemiopsis a chance to destroy local environments. Since polar ice caps will melt and the seas will cool, Mnemiopsis would be able to thrive in the now warm waters. So global warming isn't really a thing we can solve overnight, and not a really easy thing to solve. So, combined with skepticism with introducing a natural predator plus this existential crisis, it's pretty bleak for a pretty bleak future in regards to whether we can control Mnemiopsis and their expansion. Of course, the final page is my citations page, or bibliography, or reference page, is all the same thing. All my sources are cited, all the journals, all the databases, all that jazz, they've all been cited in APA 7th edition format. And that is the end of the video. I hope this project and this website contribute to a better understanding of Mnemiopsis as a species and as an invasive species.